Good morning, devotees and visitors. First, let me see that the sound is okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Any virtual or, okay, thank you. So this morning, our morning and the noontime in Wales, where Akhandadhi Prabhu is, we're going to hear from Akhandadhi Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for being here. Just a brief introduction. Some of his accolades will be, Akhandadhi Prabhu was born in Belfast, Ireland, where he first met the devotees in 1973. He studied architecture at Bristol University, but left after 2 years to join the temple at Bhaktivedanta Manor in England. In 1975, he received initiation from Srila Prabhupada. His services at the manor included book distribution, taking charge of a life membership program, and developing a network of youth clubs and sangha groups for budding devotees. He served as temple president of the manor from 1982 to 1995, during the time of the campaign to save the temple from closure by the British government. The matter was solved by gaining more land for the manor and building a new access, avoiding local properties. After the manor in the mid-90s, he moved to Wales to develop a devotee rural community while coordinating the architecture and engineering input for the temple of the Vedic planetarium. In Wales, he gathered support to fund the purchase of Buckland Hall, which he developed into the largest retreat center in the UK and managed until its sale in 2020. He has sat on various interfaith, educational, and media advisory bodies in the UK, and since 1989 has made over 500 scripted presentations for the BBC, particularly for its flagship morning news program. Currently, he's a trustee of Bhaktivedanta Manor and also of Thai Krishna, the new temple in Cardiff, Wales. While at Buckland Hall, he formed a science and philosophy initiative with a group of devotee scientists in the UK and was later invited to become a director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies in Gainesville, Florida. He sits on the exhibits committee planning the content of the museum for the west wing of the temple of the Vedic planetarium. Well, even if you just said that you were a temple president for more than a year, that would have been enough to offer all our respect. Just is enough merit for canonization, in my opinion. Thank you for being here, Prabhu. And please take it away. For those devotees who don't know this, and perhaps Akhandadhi Prabhu, you can type it as a general message in the chat. He has a channel on YouTube called the Atma Paradigm, and the lectures are absolutely fascinating, and you're going to hear a sample of it today. So without further ado, take it away, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, thank you very much, Sarvatma. Thank you for this invitation. This is my first visit to Gita Nagari.
I don't hear anything. Maybe it's just me. You're unmuted, but I cannot hear you. Can everybody hear?
Yes, we can hear.
Yes, they can hear you, but I can't. So just go ahead. I will just log on my phone.
Okay, thanks. I was saying this is my first visit to Gita Nagari, albeit virtually, and I feel that something special has not been achieved in my spiritual life by not having visited this amazing community. But thank you very much for the invitation. We'll start with some pranam mantras. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namini Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachari Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pastyati Deshatani Vanchakalpatarubhyas Chat Kripasan Nubhyevacha Patitanam Pavani.
Recording in progress.
Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. When we realized in discussion for this class that I was presenting on the 1st of April, I couldn't help but connect this with April Fool's Day. And I hope that's something that you're all familiar with. And we therefore chose the title, Has Science Made a Fool of Us? And that will be the theme that I will discuss. In Britain, the most famous April Fool's trick was played actually by the BBC in 1957 on their main investigative news program called Panorama. They did a 2-minute clip right at the end, which showed the harvesting of spaghetti from trees in Switzerland. And everyone in Britain was scratching their heads. I didn't know spaghetti grew on trees. And it's worth checking that one on YouTube as well as the Atma paradigm. But it really got people thinking. But actually, we're all under this April Fool or constant year-round fooling by science, trying to tell us that there is nothing but the physical, that we are this body, that our consciousness is a product of the brain, and that there is nothing else other than our brief kind of awareness from birth to death and then nothingness. There's one of my favorite cartoons came from a magazine called New Scientist here in the UK. And it showed scientists sitting at his desk saying, if I can just convince one person that this universe is a cold, miserable, empty, purposeless place, then my life is successful. And it almost seems that's what many scientists and many philosophers connected with science seem to want to get us convinced of. So I'm going to try and unpick this, because it was very clear that Srila Prabhupada, after a few years of preaching in the West, began to understand where the real difficulty lay in trying to reach the Western people, as he would sometimes refer. And it was in this situation where they had been confused and misled by propaganda in the name of science. Now, we have to be very clear. We're not attacking science as an epistemology, as a method for gaining validity on certain matters of this world. And we all utilize the benefits of that system in the various technologies that we employ. So I am not attacking science, but I am attacking an interpretation of scientific evidence that has no foundation in philosophy and which gives a misleading kind of impression to the general public, and something that they're already confused about because of their natural conditioning of life in this material world and the material existence. They're already confused. They don't need to be additionally confused by misleaders quoting science, which everyone or most people have a reasonable respect for. So Prabhupada, within his pranam mantras, included these two words, nirvishesha shunyavadi, for paschatya deshatarani. In order to deliver the Western world, we have to counteract the nirvishesha, which is the impersonalism, and shunyavadi, which is this idea that there is everything is nothing. Now, the Western kind of scientific interpretation is not as well developed as the shunyavadi of the Buddhists, but it is voidist none the same, because it is offering a picture that our own existence will be void after death. And that is the problem with it. And it was because of that that Srila Prabhupada then in 1976 brought together, called for devotee scientists and established the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And I was lucky in the late 70s to have some association with Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj. And then in the early 80s, when Sadhaputta came to the UK with, when he was studying at Cambridge. And some of the aspects that I learned about the Bhaktivedanta Institute then really impressed me. And it was particularly the focus on issues of consciousness. Now, over the years, my service diverged into other things, but I tried to keep abreast of what was happening within the BI. And I got to work with Sadhaputta again in the mid-90s when he was involved with the exhibits and the cosmology connected with the TOBP. But it seemed in latter years that the BI work kind of faltered. So I began my own work with various devotee scientists here in the UK. We call that ourselves the Science and Philosophy Initiative, because we were trying to bridge science and philosophy, to bring philosophy to have a look at what science is actually saying, to really analyze what is the data, what is the evidence that science has observed. Now, what is the actual interpretation that should be given to that evidence? And that's, I will take you through some of that related to consciousness today. And really what you'll see is that I am preaching, we're not this body. In all these years of Krishna consciousness, I haven't really got beyond the first few verses of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita in my preaching. I am still trying to help us understand and help myself understand that I am not a physical being. I am an entity of consciousness, and therefore not susceptible to the vagaries of physical stuff. And I'll take you through some of that. So, as I say, we're not attacking the methodology of science. In many ways, it is a very brilliant system for analyzing what we experience of the world. You have to be very clear. Science cannot tell you what the world is. That's not its purpose. It can only model the way the world works, or particularly the way we experience the world working. That is the limitation of the scientific method. And it is further limited by having to quantify that analysis in various ways. And by doing that, you're able to get a system of clarity on certain aspects of material energy, and get very, able to establish a consensus through that methodology of this is what seems to be happening within matter. It is interacting like this and that, and so on. And because of that, we can then utilize the rules that we conceive of to explain that activity, and we can develop technology. So science does work within a very, very narrow boundary. And what the scientific method has done is sacrifice scope of its investigation down to something very, very tightly limited so that it can have clarity on that. And that's not a bad thing, if that's what you want to do. If you want to kind of manipulate stuff in this world, then the scientific method works really well. But it cannot tell you what this world is, where it came from, what it's all about. And so much of what we know as reality does not fit within the box that science has created for itself. So it becomes ridiculous. And this is where the fooling comes in. It becomes ridiculous when anyone, as a scientist or a philosopher or any kind of layperson, quoting the name of science, tries to say science can explain all of reality. It cannot. By definition, it cannot do that. It cannot define its own metaphysics. And it tries to do so by generating a belief system. And that belief system comes under various names: physicalism, materialism, naturalism. These are all names given to the concept that the only thing that exists is the physical stuff that we can touch and see and observe empirically with our senses. But there's no rationale for that. There is no way you can actually establish that belief. On what premises? What are your axioms? What are the truths upon which that belief is based? That all that exists is the physical. There's nothing. Will you ever be able to prove that all that exists is the physical? No, you can't, because you could never explore everything. And we will see, and I will show you some very simple tricks, or not tricks, but methods that you can use in your own preaching that completely tear apart this idea that physicalism is the full explanation. So you will sometimes meet people who say, well, I believe in the scientific method. I will only accept that which can be proved to me by science. Now, I can understand why people might go down that route. You know, they've lost faith in hearing from spiritual or religious authority. They don't want to be seen as silly, you know, easily misled, gullible. They want to be seen as intellectually rational people. So they say, yes, I only believe in the scientific method. Now, there's two problems with that. The first is that they already do believe in something that science can't prove to them. And I'll come to that one in a minute. But the other is that if you say you believe in the scientific method and will only accept that which can be proved to you by science, then by definition, you cannot say, I believe that there is only the physical. Most people assume that believing in science means that I should believe that there is only the physical. But the scientific method can't prove that there is only the physical. Therefore, if you believe in the scientific method, you should not adopt a belief that cannot be proved by science. You should not adopt the idea that there is only the physical. I hope you can see that kind of tension or contradiction that exists in the minds of most people. And the difficulty is scientists themselves are not trained in philosophy. It's actually shocking to see their philosophical ability revealed in some of the statements they make. And most other people that we meet, we know are not philosophically trained. So they tend to think that what they believe in is rational, when actually there is no basis for it. Now, the thing that everyone believes in that cannot be proved by science or not substantiated by science is the simple fact, I exist. I know I exist. I'll question everyone here because I only see names coming up. Do you exist? And if so, what is it that convinces you you exist? Is it because you experience stuff? You feel stuff? You perceive stuff? You know stuff? You want stuff? You believe in stuff? You love stuff? All those aspects are what we know is going on as me. I love, I like, I want, I experience, I know, I feel stuff. I am the experiencer. So I exist as the experiencer. So everyone kind of understands this particular point, and it's a kind of what is called a pre-philosophical intuition. Or more really, it's more a pre-philosophical realization, because there is no scientific experiment that anyone can devise that would prove to you that you exist. You just know it. There's no philosophical premise that leads to that point that you exist. You know it already. So if we're going to have a starting point for the search for truth, for search of knowledge, it has to be from this point that I exist as an experiencing thing. And this harks back to, of course, René Descartes, and that was really what he was trying to get across to in his meditations. The rest of his stuff is highly questionable, but this particular insight that what can I know for certain? My senses keep tricking me. My mind can trick me. I can believe weird things. So, but what can I know for certain? Well, I cannot trust anything that I'm thinking, but I can trust that I recognize I am the thinking thing. I am the entity doing this cognition, doing the, with the conscious ability. I am a conscious thing. Now, he didn't express it very well, because je pense, I think, or when it's translated cogito in Latin, it's again, I think. 100 or so years before René Descartes, Jiva Goswami had already analyzed all of this in much greater detail in the Tattva Sandarbha. And he starts also with this point, that consciousness is the simple kind of starting point for our philosophy. And also Srila Prabhupada in the second canto of the Bhagavatam has a really nice purport where he's kind of bringing in some of Jiva Goswami's arguments on this as well. So that's worth looking up. So I exist because I experience, I feel, I love. And the second pre-philosophical intuition that Jiva comes up with is, I am the witness, the sakshi. I am the witness of my body's activities. I am the witness of my mind's thoughts and experiences and impressions. So I am the witness of all of that. This is a deeper realization than Descartes went. And then Jiva Goswami goes further. He says, and I am the perpetual witness, meaning I am the same witness now and in the next moment and in the moment after that and all the way back as long as I can remember. I have been the same perpetual witness throughout. And we're going to come back to that one in a little bit. And there was a fourth one that Jiva Goswami uses. And in all of this, witnessing and experiencing, I aspire for pleasure and to avoid pain. I am very particular about the experiences I want for myself. And he used that as a way of understanding that consciousness must be different to the body, because the body, being a source of pain, cannot be what consciousness wants, and therefore there could be a difference. So these are some of the pre-philosophical arguments or intuitions and realizations that Jiva Goswami uses as the foundation for exploring the whole philosophy of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And they're good for us as well. So in dealing with discussions on consciousness, we have to clarify what we're talking about, because people use this word consciousness in all sorts of ways. And it's constantly coming up, and we have some major we're planning some international seminars and workshops on this very point with some very eminent philosophers. But as far as we're concerned, when you talk about consciousness, you're not just talking about the stuff in our mind. You're not just talking about thinking. You're not talking about neural processing. You're talking about my ability to experience the sense of my own existence and experience qualitatively the world. Now, what does it mean to experience qualitatively? This leads us to one of the killer argument that consciousness is not a product of the brain. Because even though I gave those pre-philosophical intuitions, someone might say, yes, that's all right. But of course, it's all a product of advanced and complex neural activity. We know what's going on in the brain, and we can correlate your sense of awareness, your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, even your spiritual inklings. We can show you where that's all happening in the brain. Big deal. That does not prove anything. That's correlation. Now let's look at causation. Let's really look if you can tie down the experience of consciousness with the brain. And this brings in what I think is the most important word in the world, apart from Krishna and everything related to Krishna. It's this word qualia. Now, I'd like to do a little vote online, because I always do this. Hands up or give some indication with one of the reactions. Who has heard of this word qualia? Got one? Yes. Not bad. That's not bad. Two, really good. That's impressive. Yeah, I would say that's you're in the high percentages here of proportions of people who've, and I'm doing this talk at in universities and to professors and to people involved in psychology, neuroscience, biology, and so on. They haven't heard of this word qualia. And do you know why? Because qualia, as one philosopher said, this is the de facto proof that consciousness is not a product of the brain. So would you expect the academics and scientists and neuroscience to be talking about it? No, you wouldn't. It's too touchy. So what on earth? Okay, tell me more about this word qualia. What's it all about? So qualia is a kind of, it's a Latin derivation. It's not a real Latin word. It was derived from the Latin qualia, referring to qualities. And qualia is a plural word, Latinized plural. The singular is quale. And what it refers to are the qualities of our inner experience. Now, this is a really hard thing to get our heads around, because all of us assume that what we're experiencing is the stuff on the outside, and that's what I'm experiencing. Now I'm going to take you through a little exercise that tries to indicate that what you're experiencing is beyond the brain. I want you to do this, and you probably know this from your school days. This is the floating finger, where you get the two fingers like this in front of your eyes, just about 3 or 4 inches like that. I want you all to do this, please. Everyone do this. And I'm watching some of you, so I'm seeing if you're doing it. Go on, give it a go, So you're looking past, you're looking beyond. And so in a non-focused way, you're seeing your fingers are a little bit apart. So you're now seeing a floating finger or sausage in front of you. Are you seeing that? Those who can nod, are you seeing the floating sausage? Don't look at your fingers, look beyond them. But you'll see that, yes, you just need to be a little further apart, maybe from your fingers, about 2 inches apart. Can you see your sausage? If not, bring it closer to your eyes. Could I have a vote around the room about who saw their little floating finger? Right, now, okay. You experienced an image, a picture of that floating finger. Now the question is, where is that image that you just experienced? It doesn't exist out here. There's no thing floating in front of your eyes, is there? There's nothing in the external world. So you are seeing something that doesn't exist in the external world. And if you try it again and close one eye and then the other, you'll see that the floating finger disappears, right? So that means that there is no image in this eye and no image in this eye of that floating sausage. But you experienced it. Where is it? If it's not outside and it's not there in the perception of the eyes, where is it? Well, we have to say, well, it must be in the brain, because the signal from this eye and from this eye goes to this section at the back of the brain where it is processed. And then the image is generated. But wait a minute. What image in the brain? How does the brain hold an image, a picture? You are seeing a picture, and the picture is not the stuff in front of you. The picture is what you are interpreting of the electrical data at the back of your brain. So you're experiencing something which your brain doesn't have. There's no picture as such. There's no imagery in the brain. It's just patterns of electricity, ions, positive ions jumping from one neuron to another. Beep, 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 beep. That's not a picture. In the same way that your computer has kind of digitalized data, that's not a picture. It needs to be converted. That in a computer, that data has to be converted on the interface of the screen in front of you in order to become like a picture. So what is doing that interpretation, that decoding of neural data? That we say is the mind. And the mind is taking the data that the senses are bringing and basically constructing something brand new, something that doesn't exist in the external world, something that only exists in that interface between you and your brain. And why does a computer have a screen? It's because it is trying to communicate what's going on inside it to something that is not itself. Computers can, process all sorts of digital information. They never have to kind of produce a picture of it on the screen. They manipulate it all with the zeros and ones and digital data. And the brain can do the same. It's all digitalized data in the brain. Neurons, binary, on, off, patterns flying throughout your brain. There's no imagery there. But you experience that image. And that image that you're experiencing has colors, has shapes, has movement. And you might say, well, that's all yes, because it's out there. Wait a minute. You don't get to experience out there. Your brain has taken whatever is out there and with the light going into your eyes has just converted all that into some digital information in your brain. But the qualities of your experience of that have colors and pictures and movement. Those are called qualia. Qualia are not the information about the outside world. It's information about the inner experience, something that the brain hasn't got, which the eyes haven't got, and which we know doesn't exist even in the outside world. And you can analyze every sensory perception. For instance, and I don't want to spend too much time because we've got lots of other things to do. Sound. I often bring this little thing to demonstrate this point for sound. Because if I do that, you are experiencing a sound. So is that the sound? Is that the cause of the sound? Well, really, all that's happening is that a piece of metal is bending up and down like that. That's all that's happening. And a pressure wave is set up. We call it a sound wave, but it's actually better phrased as a pressure wave. Goes to the ear. Where's the sound? Your eardrum, your tympanic membrane, moves back and forwards because of the airwave. Is that sound? It moves three little bones in your inner ear. Is that sound? And then it's pressuring the fluid in the cochlea, which is this snail-like thing in the inner ear. Where's sound? And that pressure is just moving some little hairs. That's not sound. And because that hair is moved, it's going to send a signal, another electrical signal to another part of the brain. So you've got electrical activity in this part of the brain, which is producing the imagery that you experience, the pictures. And you've got electricity in other parts of the brain, which is producing the sounds. And another part, it's producing a taste and a smell and a touch sensation. All of those sensations have qualities of experience called qualia. And you cannot explain any of them in terms of what's going on in the brain. Therefore, qualia are real. They're the only thing you experience, the only thing you know about in this world, other than your realization of Krishna, which is direct from the Super Soul. But everything else about that you know in this material world is qualia, right? Because everything else, the only way you have of contacting them is done by your body. And that's not what you experience. You only experience how the senses of your body send that information to your brain, and how your mind then interprets that information and presents it to you as the conscious entity. That's the way it works. So qualia are real. Now, it doesn't mean that the external world isn't real. And a lot of non-devotee philosophers will explore, they know this, they understand this aspect of qualia, and that it's not reducible to the brain. And therefore they think, well, everything existed in their mind, therefore maybe the world doesn't exist. No, the world is there. But don't make too many assumptions about it. Your senses are pretty good at presenting, that through the mind to you. And good enough that, if you throw something in the air, you can catch it. You can do stuff. But it doesn't mean that we actually understand what the material world is in real terms. We only know how it is being cast to us on the screen of the mind. And that is an important realization I think devotees need to bear in mind in dealing with this world. We deal with the world as if our senses are telling us exactly what's happening. But when it comes to a philosophical understanding of what this world is about, you have to understand I am only getting a presentation by my mind of this world. So qualia are real. They're private. We say ineffable, which means indescribable. You can't describe what you're experiencing, say, as redness. That's the typical one. What is the redness of red? And when you're, you can say, well, I can point to something that's red, and not much of red around here. I can point to something and say, well, that's what I'm experiencing. Yeah, I'm experiencing a color related to that object. But I don't know if that's the same color that you're experiencing. And sometimes there are examples like a few years ago, there was the dress, remember that? The gold and white or black and blue dress, exactly the same data coming into our eyes, from that picture. And I love doing it at universities. You can get the whole place arguing amongst themselves and fights break out as they kind of realize that what I'm seeing is not what someone else is seeing. It's a shock to them. So this is the world of qualia. And we can do more analysis of this, but it ultimately comes down to the point that the qualities of our mind, the qualities that exist within our mind, cannot be explained, reduced, or shown to be caused by what's going on within the brain. Therefore, qualia are non-neural qualities. The mind is a non-neural thing. And the Western philosophy with its because it's been studying the physical stuff for so long, just cannot handle the idea that there is something non-physical that interacts with the physical stuff. It's starting to happen. It's starting to happen. And the consciousness is now out of the box. It's, in fact, just before I got my weekly copy of New Scientist, and it's now, it leads with the question on the cover, is consciousness a fundamental property of the universe? 10 years ago, no one would have dared to say something like that. Now they understand we cannot explain consciousness in terms of the brain. Maybe it's some kind of fundamental property. They're still trying to keep it within the physical world. They're trying to say, well, along with mass, spin, and charge, maybe consciousness is a little property down at that level. It's too late. sorry, folks, consciousness is out of the box. It's up for grabs now. And, you know, what we have been learning as Vaishnavas from the Bhagavad Gita is actually the most comprehensive explanation of what is going on. We are able to understand the reality of the world, the mind, and how the mind interacts with the physical reality. Like, I'll give you an example. Like with this, you know, that, you know, is there sound happening there? There isn't experience sound out there. But what the Sankhya philosophy of the Bhagavatam explains is that the tanmatras, the subtle sense objects, are encoded within these physical objects, the Mahabhutas. And therefore, they can be released. The tanmatras can be released, and the mind can wash over them and gather the tanmatras as qualia. So there's a proper explanation within Sankhya, and I apologize, that's probably a very quick, rough explanation. But I just want to give the point that there is a way of tying what we experience internally within our minds with the qualities that exist in the outside world. The physicalist can't do that. The physicalist concept of science cannot do that. They're just lost. But we can do that. So these are the kind of, this is what qualia reveals, that the mind is non-neural. And then the big question is, what is the observer of this screen of the mind, this interface? It's got to be the operator. That is consciousness proper. Consciousness as the entity of consciousness. That which is doing the, terrible word, conscious thing. You know, we're doing the act of being conscious. And there's no verb for this. But we have to appreciate that it is the Atma that is doing the actual conscious activity. And what we are shining our light on, and that's how the Vedanta talks about it, that the Atma shines its light of consciousness on something. And in the material world, we shine our light on the mind. So whatever the mind is gathering through the senses and constructing as qualia, that is what we're shining our light on. That is the reality that we are currently captivated by. And Prabhupada talks about this as like being captivated by a film moving on a screen. We're just captivated and we identify with it and we put ourselves in the picture and we want to be the hero of that whole set of imagery. We become the subject of the experiences. So that is how the Atma is captured. And the reason we are captivated by qualia in the mind is because there is an original state of consciousness for the Atma, an original state in relationship to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. In Krishna's world, Goloka or Vaikuntha, you know, with all the qualitative manifestations of the internal potency. That is what the Atma is used to shining its light on. That's what fills us full of attraction and pleasure. And in the material world, the poor Atma that we are shines its light on the mind, hoping to kind of derive some kind of little pleasure from what's going on in this world around me. And it's just such a pittance compared to the ocean of pleasure that consciousness is used to. And therefore, we're always hankering to enhance our pleasure because it is never going to match what we have been used to. And we're always trying to defeat trouble and pain. And we just go on this search. But as long as we are thinking that that search is going to be fulfilled within the impressions that we gather through our mind, through the material mind, we're going to be frustrated. But the whole process can be spiritualized by using the mind and filling it not with the qualia we pull in from the material world, but from those sensory perceptions that are imbued with Krishna's internal potency, They're not manifestations of the external potency. They're not prakritic. They're not part of prakriti. They are not just manifest by the modes acting within prakriti. They are actually manifested as Krishna's internal potency. So instead of hearing the little sounds that we can get from this, we're hearing the spiritual sound vibration. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And this takes us to the second key point that can be presented about consciousness and why we separate consciousness and the mind. Because I deal with so many folk who, even when they've come to the conclusion that you cannot fit qualia and the mind into the physical picture and that there must be something different, they still think that consciousness and mind are the same thing. And there's a sort of Buddhist influence in that one. Whereas we make a very clear distinction that there is the experiencer of stuff and there is the stuff that we experience. The mind holds the content of what we experience, and the Atma, the soul proper, is the experiencer. And that is a good reason for separating them. And there is another really important fundamental distinction between the entity of consciousness and mind, and which separates consciousness from the prakriti world of the externality of physical stuff and the subtle material stuff of the mind, ego, buddhi, chitta, etc. So what separates it is this, the point that I meant from Jiva Goswami at the beginning, that I am the perpetual experiencer. That's a very important meditation. Often what I say to lecture folk is, the Denos Minyata Dehi first, cast your mind back to your first day at school, right? You were there. You're feeling the experiences, were you frightened? Were you happy? Were you excited? What was going on in you? What were you feeling at that time? So they get to really, and do it now for yourselves if you want, what were you feeling on your first day at school? You remember it, I don't think many people have forgotten about their first day. And so that was us then. Now we of course go do the whole thing about the body changing and the mind changing. And I am the person still experiencing. Of course, various aspects of my selfhood have changed. And again, this is something that people conflate. They can't separate I as the experiencer from the various types of I selves there are. I have various concepts of me as in my selfhood, which we know are ahankara. These are kind of designations that we have imposed upon the Atma experiencer. We have started to think of the Atma experiencer as being this type of body, male, female, etc. Big, small, whatever, old, young, whatever it is. This occupation, that occupation, this ethnicity, this, whatever. We've given all sorts of personality traits to, within this ahankara concept of ourselves. But the only constant thing about that, the selfhood, is the experiencer, conscious self. That I am the witness. I am the person, the entity that is identifying with all those different concepts of myself. And that's something we have to help people deconflate. As I say, the general population's understanding of philosophy is so pathetic. They are not being given proper guidance and training and education, so we can expect them to have all sorts of confusion at every single step. So another simple way of talking about this idea that consciousness is perpetual is that I am the observer of this moment, the world outside me, and as it's presented within my mind. Stuff in the world is changing. Things are moving around all the time. They're disintegrating, they're growing, they're changing in some way, or they're moving. And similarly in the mind, things are coming, going, chitta vritti, as the Yoga Sutra says. It's constant flux. in the mind. But I observe this moment, that moment passes, I observe the next moment, that moment passes, I observe the next moment. So I am perpetual in that I am watching the movement of time as it manipulates the world around me and as it manipulates my mind. Now that means that I am transcendental to the effects of time. Time changes the world, time changes the stuff of my mind, but I am the entity which is able to see that stuff changing over time, but without being changed myself. I am not changed as the observer. Yes, the fact that I experience a nice moment might change my personality, and the next moment a nasty one, I'll change my mood, but I, as the experiencer, remain constant. Therefore, consciousness is not controlled by time. It is time transcendental. Simple. And no one can argue against that. The Buddhists try to, because the Buddhists have this, what's called Kshanikavad philosophy, that everything is just the moments of experience, but they are not talking about the experiencer of those moments. We are. The experiencer is transcendental. The moments aren't. So this is kind of the purport of that 213. As I say, that's as far as I get in the Bhagavad Gita, you know. But by that point, Krishna has already blown our minds in terms of what's on offer in Krishna consciousness. So this allows us to have a three kind of function model. The external world, body, brain, all the physical functions. The mental functions, which we know break down into various subcomponents. But for the discussion that I have with the public, we've just got to say mind. You know, that's as much as they can handle on that. And consciousness. These are three categories of functions, which are so clearly different, so clearly irreducible to one another. But they're all real. We know consciousness exists because that's what I'm experiencing. I know qualia exists because that's the stuff I experience. And I take it that qualia are picking up the information from some form of outside world, whatever that is. So physical stuff is real, mental stuff is real, the consciousness stuff is real. I tend to not focus on what these are composed of. In universities, I actually never talk about matter and spirit, never. I probably will never use the word soul because I'm talking about consciousness. See, when you talk about soul, people think that you're introducing something, especially in these contexts of philosophy and science. They think, why are you bringing the soul into it? You know, where's that come from? No, we're talking about consciousness. You can't say consciousness is something new that we're bringing into the picture because you are a conscious being. Science is the application of your conscious willingness to explore, to know, and to analyze. So consciousness obviously is already in the picture. So when we talk about consciousness, we're not bringing anything new into it. We're just identifying where it belongs in terms of these functions. And people might say, well, what's consciousness made of? What's the soul made of? What's Atma? What is it? But that's a bad question because no one can tell you what physical matter is made of. If anyone says, oh, it's made of atoms and quarks and electrons, no, seriously, no. The only way that we have in science of analyzing matter is in terms of the properties and behavior and interactions that we observe. And we give it names and we say an electron is a thing with these type of properties, this type of mass, spin, and charge. Why? We're giving it those properties because we see it does this with these other things, which has different mass, spin, and charge. So these are all just concepts trying to describe what things do, not what things are. So I say, fine, That's how you're analyzing matter. That's how we're going to analyze the mind and consciousness. Let's look at what consciousness does. Let's look at what the mind does. Let's look at what the brain is able to do. That's our way of analyzing. Because if you start talking about what they are and what they're made of, then you just get in, these people just get into their religious hang-ups. Oh, you're trying to bring God into it, You're trying to kind of make us believe in something that, and there's no reason to let them go down that false path and just be bewildered by their own prejudices. So these are just some little tricks that we use. So I'm going to just wrap up just with a few takeaways, and then maybe if there's any time for questions. First of all, as I said, please understand I'm not attacking science. I like science. I like what it can do within its own little limitations. I just don't like when people in the name of science claim more for it than is actually philosophically valid. Science works within a very narrow band of investigation, and it should be very pleased and just keep to that and not make pronouncements about anything beyond its scope and its ability to speak on. Again, I'm just stressing about consciousness. When we talk about consciousness, we are talking about the entity that is capable of conscious experience, the experiencer. And we have to kind of clarify that in discussions with others. I think it's very helpful to use one or more of these pre-philosophical intuitions as a starting point in discussions on the nature of the world and experience, philosophy and science. I exist. You've got to start with that point, because the Buddhists will sometimes, someone will pop up and say, oh, but actually we don't really exist, and maybe you might have this belief that in the future you will disintegrate or your consciousness will in some way be voided. But at the moment, you exist, don't you? That's the point. At this moment, you think you exist. So everyone knows I exist, at this moment. And that's why we got to work from where we're at this moment. So I exist. I am the witness. I am the perpetual witness. I see time moving, but I'm not affected by time. And I aspire for pleasure. So John Searle, one philosopher who would completely disagree with on everything else he said about consciousness, gave a really good definition that because he said it, we can use it against anyone else in philosophy who's talking about consciousness. And that is the essential traits that have to be explained in any theory of consciousness are unified, qualitative subjectivity. Meaning that you can explain why there is an I who is having everything that our senses are pulling in is being unified into one picture and experience. It may be multisensory, but it's a multisensory unified experience. You're hearing, seeing, smelling all the situation in one go by one entity, yourself. And what you're experiencing within that is qualitative. It has qualities of your experience, qualia. So therefore, I've given you two kind of key discussion points. Learn about qualia. It's so powerful. There is nothing that these guys can say about it, honestly. And that the separating, so qualia establishes that the mind is non-neural. It is not a neural function. It is something of its own type. And then we use the argument of consciousness being able to observe the passing of time to separate mind and consciousness. And that gives us the physical functions, the mental functions, and consciousness functions. And that's the key picture of the Sankhya framework. It's only the beginning. This, incredible that, it takes so much work to get most of these philosophers just to this beginning point. But it is a powerful model, a powerful framework, and trying to, I hope that we've got lots of devotees now. We've got over 100 devotee scientists, most of them with PhDs working around the world. We have a network called the BI Connect, and we've started workshops on neuroscience and applications in biology and medicine. We're doing stuff in physics. And of course, BIHS has got its cosmography and cosmology unit. So there's a lot going on in the BI. There's quite a rejuvenation of this aspect of Srila Prabhupada's preaching. And we want to do more to bring some of the exciting ideas that the devotees are coming up with, to wider devotee audience, because I think I remember feeling that I really wanted to get stuff from the BI so we could use in our preaching and to help explain things in a rational way. Because honestly, please, there can never be a devotee with any doubt that the science and philosophy community in the outside world have got anything to challenge Krishna consciousness with. They've got nothing. Nothing. And yet we have to become expert in articulating the incredible philosophy that's been put in our hands by Srila Prabhupada in order to present that to them. So, it's just a little flavor. I'm going to put search Atma Paradigm, all one word, on YouTube. If you've got hours and hours to spend, we have, there's a series of 35 lectures where we take this idea, develop a lot of the points I made on consciousness, and then start creating a better understanding of our metaphysics. And once you understand metaphysics, that opens up the whole world of what biology is about. And all the questions around speciation and the nature of consciousness interaction with the body become dealt with through that. And then the bigger picture, even of the universe and the cosmos. So thank you very much. I'm sure there's a few comments or thoughts. I'd be very pleased to hear from you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. This has been a very enlightening experience for all of us. I do have some questions, but I will probably wait, see if there are other devotees asking or expressing their thoughts. I'm looking at the chat here. Let's say we pass the cogito ergo sum, the card that you say that, would you say that it requires a certain level of sincerity? And I think this, the false ego, the pride associated with knowing something about science kind of impedes the vision of something that may be fundamental and tacit, implicit. And so how do you get, you even said it, that it's so hard to bring someone to the very beginnings of philosophy, to someone to understand that the mind is not material, that there is such a thing as consciousness. So wouldn't you say in your own preaching, do you encounter that a large part of your audience or the scientists themselves, are they sincere enough that they will actually want to go on this journey?
You're absolutely right that actually convincing someone of these aspects, that there is something more to existence than just birth to death, does depend on their own internal sincerity. And there are certainly some souls who will never want to contemplate or countenance any idea that might shake their atheistic, materialistic faith. And probably we can't move them. But I think our audience is, I would put a figure of 70 to 80% of the populace who actually believe that there is something more to existence. Who, you know, they may give lip service to oh yes, science says that there's Big Bang, science says there's evolution, science says the consciousness is from the brain. They may give lip service to that. But in their hearts, they kind of know there's something more, isn't there? But they're not going to give up or show that they have lost faith in the physicalist propaganda of the scientists. Because to do that labels you as being, you know, sentimental, gullible, you know, fanaticist, you know, fantasist. So they don't want that. So therefore, our job is to demonstrate that the actual intellectual, rational approach is to understand that there is something more than the physical. That's the actual intellectual, you know, position. So, but if they are determined not to accept that, argument and rationale won't change them. But we can win over many people in the public, and they can start to think, oh, well, maybe, you know, if I can get the hang of these arguments, I can chat about them with my friends and with my family, and maybe won't seem so stupid. And maybe if that's the you know, if I can give some rationale to these things, then maybe I could explore Krishna consciousness. So I think that's really where we're at. But in the academic world, as I say, it's changing. It has changed in the 10, 15 years that I've been involved in this in ways that we just wouldn't have expected. As a consciousness is now out of the box. The next one that's coming out of the box is subtle physics. You know, how mind connects with matter. That's the next one that's escaping at the moment. So there's things are happening. People are starting to kind of, it's been okay to look at these things. I'm not saying it's all because of BI work, but we may have been doing our bit and others are starting, there seems to be a bit of a, you know, wave happening at the moment, which is very interesting. But you're right, we can't convince those determined not to accept. Or at least it'll be very, very hard.
I see a parallel between the work that you're doing and what Bhaktivinoda Thakur did, which is to rescue bhakti from a sentimental process for widows and people who have no rational thinking. It's just all feelings.
Yeah, I think that was Prabhupada's mission. I think Prabhupada saw it like that. That he was giving the most intellectual, intelligent philosophy, that if you're a thinking person, this is where you should go. But you're right, yeah, this follows in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's footsteps. Good point.
I have also a question about artificial intelligence and how the question of mind being a non-physical entity could adapt as in artificial intelligence. One of the arguments that they have is that the machines do learn from their own mistakes, do make their own decisions. They utilize discrimination, etc. So how do you attribute non-physical qualities to simply hardware?
Yeah, I sat on a workshop committee. It was to advise the government on ethics and AI. And we had two major meetings at Windsor Castle a couple of years ago. And we had all the top brains in Britain. Neil Lawrence was looking after DeepMind, the Turing Institute, the Leverhulme Institute. They were all there briefing us on where AI is at. And the idea that AI can become conscious is not, no one's thinking along those lines, for much the same reasons as we've just been outlined, that the qualities of experience and the functions of the experiencer cannot really be shown to be present in a digital format. What AI tries to do, and we actually have a whole team working in Gainesville on this, because Gainesville University is now the big AI university in America. What AI tries to do is to mimic the human mind, which is interesting, because Krishna set up the human mind to mimic consciousness. So AI is trying to mimic the processes of the mind, but it does so not by doing the way that either the brain works or the mind works, but trying to create what are called proxies. By, I mean, for instance, I'm trying to think of a way of an example on that. I may not know why you are doing certain things, but by watching you, I could say that your alarm goes off at 4 o'clock in the morning, whatever. And I could then say, okay, well, maybe going off at an alarm going off at 4 o'clock is good for spiritual life, or something like that. I'm using it as a proxy. You know, I may not understand why you're doing something, how you come to a conclusion, but I can say, if he's doing it, I'll do it. That's a proxy. So AI tries to create proxies like that. It's a way of mimicking, not actually replicating the mind or the brain. And that's an important distinction. There is a question, and I'm not sure if it's possible for us to answer this question. Could a machine become as good as a biological organism in order that some Atma and their mind could inhabit it? Now, I don't think it's as simple as that because of the way the metaphysics works. I think we're light years from that, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is some yogic system that couldn't account for that. But that's still not, that's still, consciousness is consciousness, mind is mind, and the machine is the machine. And anyone who thinks they're going to upload their consciousness into the internet, you know, it's ridiculous. And most people in the field know it's ridiculous.
Anyone else would like to ask? It will be a pity to let Akhandadhi Prabhu go without hearing more.
Hare Krishna. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much for the class. I really appreciate the scientific basis for understanding all the points of consciousness and how it relates to mind and matter and everything. And so just wanted to say I really appreciate the class. But I have a question too. You were speaking about the perpetual nature of observation, how the observation remains the same from one moment to the next moment. And so I was wondering, how do you reconcile that with the tendency to forget, things? How can, like someone may argue, that if we forget something, then how is it that the soul was still perpetually observing that instance? That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, and this is getting into the fascinating area of how we are aware of stuff and the consciousness's relationship with the mind and how the mind actually functions. And in one respect, you actually almost have to think of the mind as its own entity. I think it's Baladev Vijayabhushan who says, the cognitive elements, mana, buddhi, ahankara, and also chitta is the fourth one, are considered to be almost conscious. They're not conscious, but they're almost conscious because they mimic conscious awareness so well that we become captivated by them. And what is happening is that every impression comes into the mind, and the Yoga Sutra uses the word pratyaya as an impression. And then that sinks to the bottom of the pool of the mind, and it becomes a sanskar. Now, we've used the word sanskar in different ways, sometimes as like wedding sanskars, you know, purification processes. But in this context, sanskar is a memory trace. It's dropped to the bottom of the pool of the mind. And according to the nature of the mind, in terms of being sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic, you are more or less able to retrieve those little memory pebbles from the bottom of the pool. For instance, if the mind is very sattvic, then the mind can reach down and pick out almost any pebble from the bottom. And there are some people actually who, you know, who it's almost a disorder of the mind, that they remember every single moment of their life. But actually that's not helpful. You need to let things go and drop down there and just be available when you want them. Whereas the rajasic mind is when the water, the pool of the mind is agitated in the surface. And when you look into a pool where the surface is agitated, you can see down, but it's not so clear how to get that memory back. And you're going, oh, trying to remember that point. Oh yeah, here it is, right? But tamasic situation, a tamasic mind, or in the mode of ignorance, is where the mind is just cloudy, dirty, you know, it's all silty. You can't see the bottom. You can't find those things. You can't recall things. And of course, recall is one of the functions of buddhi, and buddhi is under the care of the Paramatma, you know, matak shmitir jnanam apohanam cha. You know, the shmiti and apohanam are, and jnana comes from that. So the super soul is controlling our buddhi and enabling us to reach into the mind to bring out the things that we need to know at this time. But always consciousness is the witness, receiving the stuff on the screen of the mind. I don't know, does that help on that question?
Yes, Prabhu, thank you very much. Yeah, that's good.
Who's coming in next? A couple of hands up.
Go ahead, Queenie.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity and for your spending time with it. It's so fascinating to hear all of that. I think I'm sort of like a thinking person, so it's really captured my mind. And I was, before coming to Krishna Consciousness, I was sort of like looking for some scientific research in consciousness and like spiritualities and things like that. And I know like UPenn has such a big like center about, they're doing some sort of scientific research with spirituality and like scanning the brains and things like that. And I was wondering like how, did you ever come to the US? That's my first question, and give lectures at universities. And my second question is, so I heard that when they scan the brain of some certain like yogic Buddhist monk or something, that they see something like, I think like something different, like in their brain, like there's some light or some spotlight or something like that. I didn't remember for sure, but so I don't have my question formed, but I just get my head thinking about this aspect about doing research, scientific research about spiritualism, and what does that mean, and is that something that seems to be fruitful in the future for our ISKCON movement if we sort of also step into that area? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, it is fruitful. And we have groups of devotees doing different aspects of that at the moment. So through Sarvatma, if they want anyone, you have anyone who wants to kind of be involved in research, then that's great. Let me just make a comment about the kind of, a lot of these studies where they're scanning brains of people in meditation or praying or, you know, with religious insights, whatever. These guys, they're trying to say, oh, the reason that you are having those religious feelings is because this brain activity. So we can show you the brain activity as if that's an explanation. And it presumes that the brain activity precedes thought. Whereas we are working with devotees doing this type of research to show that thought precedes brain activities. And that's a whole subject, which I'm not going to detail one. You know, we could have a presentation on that another day. But brain activity, the brain is actually molded by thoughts. It takes different shapes. So you can expect that those persons who are engaged in spiritual, religious activity will have different networks within their brain that their mind is relating to. So just, you know, the way these guys are trying to do it, the same way they do with DNA. Oh, we've just identified the gene that makes you like this or that, you know. They don't understand actually how personality reflects in gene expression. So in the same way, the brain is very plastic. It's very easily rerouted. And there's lots of experiments going on that at the moment as well. So this is undermining the sort of cheap analysis that people are saying, oh, we can see this particular activity and we can correlate it to this trait. Therefore, that's why that trait exists. And, you know, it's not very rigorous at the moment. And yeah, I do come to America because I'm involved with Gainesville, and I tend to end up down there a lot. But it would be wonderful at some point to be able to visit Gita Nagari.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. So but how do we do like scientific research about spirituality? It just doesn't seem right, because like you said, it's only about the physical thing. That's term scientific research is only about what on the physical world. So how do we do scientific research on consciousness?
Well, here's how it works. The centers of our body interact with the external world. That bit that's where so-called physical science can be done. But then there's the interaction of mind and the body, and thereby understanding the external world. That interaction between mind and matter, if you like. And I hate using that, but others do use it. That is the field of subtle science. That can be explored. And Prabhupada gave a hint of that in the third canto, where he says, you know, the exploration of the Akash is ripe for scientific investigation. I can't remember the exact words, but he basically said that's where scientific investigation. You can investigate the mind's interaction with matter. For instance, at Princeton, they did 27 years of demonstrating that human intention can affect physical machines, particularly ones based on quantum activity. And just last Saturday, we were invited to give, Brahmatirtha and myself give a talk to what's called the International Consciousness Research Laboratories, which was started by Brenda Dunn, who was the laboratory manager and with Robert John at Princeton, and who we've become very close friends. So we gave a presentation showing that the model that Princeton developed for mind-matter interaction can be seen in the Sankhya philosophy. And we showed how we can extend and expand and improve her model, you know, through the adoption of Sankhya. And at the end, Brenda, who was actually in hospital suffering from a broken hip at the time, kind of was just blissed out that, you know, the BI is carrying forward this work that they were doing at Princeton. And so we're making connections with those who are interested in this and trying to help them. And our own team are focusing on this interaction where mind and matter interact. Because we have to understand that everyone uses this model of consciousness, mind, and matter all the time. Everyone who's a doctor or a therapist uses it. I talk to you and find out, what are you experiencing? So I'm dealing with the consciousness. I'm now going to say, well, I need you to change your mind or your behavior on certain things. So I need you to change your mind in order to engage your body for healing. So even a standard doctor recognizes that there are these different functions. Why am I treating you for pain? Because consciousness is experiencing pain within the mind. I'm not treating the body, I'm treating the conscious experience. So everyone automatically uses this. We just have to show them that it's not just a fanciful or methodological thing. It's actually the real reality is consciousness is different from mind, different from the body. So plenty of opportunities within that mind matter field. But if you want to study consciousness properly, that's yoga, bhakti yoga. The interaction between consciousness and mind, that is the preserve of yoga. You know, and nothing else will do it. Nothing, and that is a science of its own. So you've got physicalist science or physical science dealing with the interaction of our senses and the world and trying to analyze how the world is playing its stuff. We've got mind matter science going on, which is willing to look at how mind interacts with the world. And we have yoga science, or we would call experiential philosophy or experiential science, dealing with how consciousness links with mind. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you so much, Prabhu. This is very fascinating.
We have a couple of devotees. I don't know who was first, Agari Krishna Prabhu or Yasudev. Please, whomever was first, unmute yourself.
It was Yasudev.
Yasudev Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this very exciting stuff. It's very interesting. You spoke a lot about qualia and the sort of subjective experience of consciousness. And I'm wondering if you're familiar with a sort of counter argument from a fellow in Germany named Thomas Metzinger. He has this, what he calls the mind group. He makes the claim that the subjectivity of experience is actually the evidence that a self does not exist. There's only a sort of constant conscious experience, but no indication that there's something like a self. That part is just a construct of all of this different conscious experience. We don't really have any, we might have evidence that we're having a subjective conscious experience, but no evidence that there is any particular self or identity. He claims that it's a hallucination. You're familiar with this, man?
Yeah, I think Metzinger is trying to, it's a kind of the Buddhist kind of view, the Kshanikavad, that you're just, there's just your conscious experiences. Now, there's no explanation of why conscious experience have to be qualitative in that picture. And there is just simply a denial of the experiencer. So it's really not a very articulate and comprehensive picture of what's going on. You can say maybe, you know, consciousness doesn't exist, but he's got no rationale for it. Well, and he's denying the kind of pre-philosophical intuitions. He is not dealing with the aspect of subjective consciousness. There's basically all philosophies of consciousness fall into four camps. The first one is to diminish what we're talking about when we talk about consciousness, to talk about neural processing, psychology. In this case, to talk about experiences, but not to talk about experiencer, or to deny that just to say consciousness is not what we think it is. We may think we are, and Dennett does this as well. We may think we are conscious, but we're not. That's just denying, that's not an explanation. Or the emergence, supervenience, or what's called identity theories of consciousness, where you just basically say somehow or other, these qualities of our experience and this sense of being the subject emerge from brain activity. So that's just conjuring. There's no causal link there whatsoever. And there's no way of actually relating them together. And if you're going to be able to say that this can come out of this, and I'm not going to give you any mechanism for that, or I'm not going to explain why they are completely different in nature and qualities, then basically you can say unicorns can pop out of water. It doesn't, anything goes at that point. So there's cheating going on here, I'm afraid, with these philosophers. They're not rigorous enough. And that's why there are so many different philosophers on consciousness, because they're all arguing something which is not substantial enough for anyone else to take them seriously. And the final one is promise. Oh, in the future, we'll sort it out. But fortunately, most people are now dropping a lot of people are dropping the brain being the source of consciousness. And that's why they're kind of panpsychism. Of all things, panpsychism is not the hot topic in consciousness studies. And panpsychism is just a step away from Vaishnav understanding. Does that help with Metzinger?
Yes, thanks, Prabhu. I appreciate your perspective.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Thank
you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. My qualia of experiencing your words is like an intellectual trailer for the Atma paradigm. I did listen to it last day and I was really on the edge of my seat. So thank you so much. My question relates to social media and how it creates and the qualia of various social movements that persons, even devotees, because we are executing mixed devotional service, may identify with, and how those can be explained and to try to, ease some of the tension. So, for example, in my DNA, I may identify as a Black person. I can join the We Buy Black movement and only buy commodities from Black people. And I can identify with the Black Lives Matter and saying that, yes, there's police brutality in America and people are killing, policemen are killing Black people. And even I can look at the situation in Ukraine and say, oh, the plight of my Black people are being undermined because, and now what's being highlighted in Ukraine is that, oh, because it's white people experiencing it, that's what's given attention. So as Krishna explains, he says that contemplation of the sense objects leads to attachment for them. And we've been discussing Narada Muni's allegorical presentation to King Prachinabarsha, and how in the heart there's different houses that are constructed. And so I can experience, so when I look at social media, I may not have things within my experience to inform a specific identification. So as I said, my last name may be Diaz, it may be, from South America. So my entire lineage and ancestry, I may not be, quote unquote, a Black homogeneous person from a genomic point of view in terms of my genes, but I identify with that. So is the qualia that's happening in terms of how I process social media is Narada Muni's description of how houses, different types of streets, gambling houses, this and that, constructed in the heart, where I then identify with a specific social construct, and then because of how I'm processing, because of my qualia, and because of how I'm processing social media information. Is that the explanation, or is it something else? And are there devotees in the BI looking into this from just a qualitative point of view, not like empiric point of view, and just giving commentary on how social media is like churning different, just large sets of qualia, which create these different social movements?
Yeah, I'd like to first I think there's an important discussion here. I'd like to clarify first the use of the word qualia. I'm trying to, I think we should use qualia when we're talking about the qualities of my internal experience. Now, you've extended it a little bit to consider how that, what I experience about the world, you know, directly or from social media, then manifests in terms of the concepts that we each have of ourselves, you know, and the group and identification that we identify with. And we've all got it, you know, whatever our experiences are growing up and friends and things we're influenced by, we just automatically assign ourselves with an identity and link up with some group that we think shares our views on this. And that's natural. That's just what the living entity does. And in one sense, it's sort of a reflection of what we do in the spiritual world as well with Krishna's groups, you know, and, you know, we link up with those who serve Krishna in a similar way. But we can do it in the spiritual world without the competition, without the argument, without the conflict. Whereas in the material world, it's perverted. And therefore, every time we identify with one group, we tend to make ourselves at odds with some other groups. And so it goes on. And that reinforces my determination to support my group, because I think everyone else has been unjust and doing us down. I grew up in Belfast. You know, for years, I was in the middle of the Troubles. I mean, it's not a joke, but up until a few days ago, I went to school on the most bombed street in Europe. You know, 200 yards away was a building that was bombed 37 times. But now, you know, anyway, I've seen the kind of communalism that existed, and that was existing didn't need social media to create that. We created those groups and arguments and conflicts amongst ourselves. And that's just the way the material energy works. So yeah, we have to be very careful what we're processing qualitatively about the world, because it does feed into the concept we have of ourselves. And that's why actually the process of Krishna consciousness is, other processes work on control of the senses, or the control of the mind, or the Yoga Sutra is control of buddhi. But actually, in Krishna consciousness, what we're being asked to focus on and manipulate is our sense of ahankara. That's what we're transforming. And that's the root. If we can transform my identification, not in terms of all the stuff in society and my body and, you know, the world outside, but I'm trying to adopt the identity, I am the eternal servant of Krishna. That's what I'm working on. And thereby by changing the ahankara and orientating it towards service to Krishna, then automatically I'm praying to Krishna to control my intelligence, to engage my mind and my senses in service to Krishna. So that's the unique thing about Bhakti Yoga. It's not control of our senses and work. It's not control of the mind. It's not control of, it's transformation of ahankara. So we should be very careful. And I think you've raised this point, that by whatever we are imbibing about the world, let it enhance and reinforce that identity that I am simply Krishna's eternal servant. And then I think we'll make progress.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you for your question. It was great.
I think this includes the idea that should have your back because there's so much more to this.
Sarvatma, we're not hearing you very well.
How is it now? Can you hear me okay?
Bit of feedback, but it's a bit of echo, but it's okay.
All right. What I wanted to say is that this probably precludes the idea that we should have you again, as you have a lot to say and we have a lot to hear about. So if I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you can generously give us some more of your time, we will take you up in a moment. So is that a possibility at all?
I'm your servant.
Okay, we can.
This is the fun of life, isn't it? Just sharing Krishna consciousness with devotees, and you're been wonderful. This is my real, as I say, I feel I've finally made a connection with Gita Nagari, and I'm very grateful to be invited and adopted here today. Thank you very much. Certainly we can meet up again.
Okay, so thank you very much, devotees. Thank you very much, Akhandadhi Prabhu. It was our pleasure to have you with us, and we'll see you whenever Krishna decides and you agree with the idea. Thank you, everyone. Just a small announcement that there's going to be a series of speakers. We have, I believe, Banu Swami tomorrow morning and Harisori Prabhu the day after that. And I forget, I think it's Bhakti maybe Bhakti Chaitanya Swami or someone of that caliber on the 5th. So thank you, everyone, and have a good Krishna conscious day. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
So
Hare
much,
Krishna.
Prabhu.
Thank
Hare
you so much,
Krishna.
Prabhu.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.